season of humility. And just to review, in observing the Christmas season, it is important to avoid falling into the trap of eagerly anticipating a specific special day of commemoration. The commemorative feasts in the Hebrew culture weren't simply occasions to eat good food, but they were periods of reflection and anticipation. They reflected upon what God had done, remembered who he showed himself to be. We've talked about the fact that just because God performs a miracle, sometimes the miracle is not the point. The point is he's trying to show you something about himself. And so they reflected on what he had done, who he showed himself to be leading up to that event, celebrated their relationship with him, and looked forward to what was coming in the future. So it wasn't just a day and we're done, but it was a time period where they were in deep reflection on whatever the feast was supposed to be about. They were reflecting on what that meant about God, who he had shown himself to be up to that day, and were looking forward to continuing to relate with God on that basis. So as we come to Christmas, and as we've been trying to do in these discussions, not just focusing on Christmas Day, but experience it in terms of the season, looking at what God did in Christmas, who he showed himself to be, who he has been to us up to this point, and look forward to being able to experience that in the future. The miracle of Christ's birth embodies many miraculous messages. Rather than relegating the celebration to a specific Christmas service, and this is why we didn't do a Christmas service per se this year. We don't want it just to be a service or a Christmas sermon where we go over the narrative of Christmas. This month, we've spent the time contemplating a specific characteristic of the birth of Christ, how it reveals the character of God, and how believers can best honor that in their lives. The focus of this Christmas season is going to be has been humility. The humility of Christ's birth and his ministry stand as object lessons for true ministry and a resounding testimony to the love of God. So that's why we've been doing, we try to do things a little bit outside the box. I tend to forget that there is a box or where it is, but we've been doing things outside of the traditional box of Christmas seasons. Just to recap where we've been over the last two discussions. In the first lesson of the season of humility, we discussed the humility of the master. It was a discussion of Christ's humility as we talked about him washing his disciples' feet, presumably in the middle of an argument over which disciple would be greatest in the kingdom. He declares to them that the servant is not greater than his master, nor is the one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. This practical demonstration of Christ's servant leadership points to the love of the Father being such that he does not deem himself above reaching down to cleanse the filth of life in a fallen world from humanity, and shows us that God is a hands-on God. In other words, when Jesus got up at that table and bent down and washed everybody's feet, he showed them that I'm not above getting down in the nastiness of what you've picked up over the course of your life and washing it away. Yes, I am your master. Yes, I am the Son of God, but you're not so dirty and so filthy that you're beneath me putting my hands on. It's an object lesson to us as we go about dealing with people. When we talk about compassion, when we talk about interacting with people, sometimes we're afraid we're going to get some of their mess on us and we have to keep them at arm's length. But getting their mess on us does not make us any less saved or any less holy. In fact, it is following in the example of Christ. The second discussion looked at Christ's decision to identify with the fallen state of Israel in his humanity, rather than distance himself from it in his divinity when he was baptized. While being the Son of God, he chose to make himself of no reputation and bore the infirmities of humanity, even to the painfully humiliating death of the cross. In other words, we told Christ was baptized. Christ had no need to be baptized, but he allowed himself to go through the ritual of baptism because even though he was completely divine, he was also completely human. And rather than distance himself from humanity, he embraced and counted himself as one of us, as one of the fallen. We have a tendency when folks got issues to say that's them, whether it's our family, whether it's people we grew up with, whether it's the old neighborhood, that's them, that's what they do. Jesus said that it is necessary for us to do this, that we can fulfill all righteousness. He embraced and counted himself as one of the group that he was in, rather than trying to pull away. contrasted with, and then allowed himself to be subjected to a lot of stuff that God really does not have to subject himself to. Contrasted with Western consumeristic individualism, the humanity demonstrated by Christ on behalf of the kingdom stands as a stark example of a willingness to forego entitlements for the sake of something greater than the individual. We talked about that being the gospel according to Mike, or Mike's definition of humility is a willingness to forego what I have a right to, what I'm entitled to, what I believe I deserve, because there is something bigger than me that actually needs to happen here. I'm not going to get off on that because I'll run out of time if I start talking about John. But you know, in America, we're told, get what you deserve. Get what you deserve. Get it if you have to step over people. Get it if you have to knock people over. Worry about you, what you got a right to do, what you got a right to decide, what you're entitled to. Christ demonstrates humility, and I deserve worship. In Jesus, I deserve worship. I deserve glory. I deserve to be at the top of the world, but I'm coming in through the back door in the middle of a scandal. Yesterday, I talked a little bit about it, and I referenced Jesus in terms that I don't know anybody who's ever referenced Jesus, and I called him the bastard child of Mary, which is really what the scandal behind his birth was. The illegitimate child of Mary. We don't know who this kid's daddy is. That's the role he took on when he came down. Forget about what he was entitled to. That's what he brought himself under, because he was trying to propagate something bigger in being the kingdom and demonstrating the kingdom. True disciples of Jesus believe that the glory of God and the reconciliation of humanity to God are more important than individual wants, needs, and desires, and demonstrate that through a willingness to be inconvenienced and even humiliated to advance kingdom agenda. So that's where we've been. Any questions or comments or thoughts of where we've covered thus far? Today we are going to talk about somebody that does not get a lot of press in the Christmas narrative, and that's Joseph. Most times when it's Christmas, everybody want to talk about Mary. Like Joseph didn't have to deal with nothing. Well, we're going to talk about Joseph. We're going to come through two passages of scripture, Matthew 1:18-24, and then a passage in Matthew 2. And it reads, "This is how Jesus the Messiah was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph. But before the marriage took place, while she was a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her fiance, was a good man and did not want to disgrace her publicly," better than me, "so he decided to break the engagement quietly. As he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. 'Joseph, son of David,' the angel said, 'do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save people from their sins.' All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. 'Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel,' which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded and took Mary as his wife." Matthew 2:13-15. "After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. 'Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother,' the angel said. 'Stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him.' That night, Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother, and they stayed there until Herod's death. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, 'I called my son out of Egypt.'" Jumping to the 19th verse, "When Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. 'Get up,' said the angel. 'Take the child and his mother back to the land of Israel, because those who were trying to kill the child is dead.' So Joseph got up and returned to the land of Israel with Jesus and his mother. But when he learned that the new ruler of Judea was Herod's son, Archelaus, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee. So the family went and lived in a town called Nazareth. This fulfilled what when the prophet said, 'He will be called a Nazarene.'" So Joseph, like I said, he doesn't get a lot of press because people just, he's not deeply written in the story. Most of the narrative is about Mary and what Mary went through. But he is really a huge hero in this story. And we want to try to highlight that as it relates to humility. What we just read was when Joseph finds out Mary is pregnant, he debates on whether or not decides he's not going to marry her. And the question is, how do I break off the marriage or break off the engagement? And he could have done it publicly. If he had done it publicly, Mary would have been put to death, or he could have done it privately. That's what he had planned on doing. Angel comes and says, don't be afraid to take Mary for your wife. Explains that it's a work of God. Joseph decides to go ahead and marry Mary. After Christ is born, part of the story of birth of Christ is that Herod wanted Christ killed. I'm not going to rehash the entire story. You can read it if you want to. But his original plan for trying to kill Jesus didn't work. So he made a decree saying every child under the age of 2 in Bethlehem is going to be killed. So an angel comes to Joseph and tells him, get up, get out, go to Egypt, because they're seeking to kill him. He gets up, he relocates to Egypt. I don't want to I might as well deal with this. For us, get up and relocate to Egypt is no big deal. We got planes, trains, and automobiles. We can get up and leave, and there's highways, and it's not really that big of a deal. Not to mention we're all individualistic anyway. A kid will grow up, I'm gonna move to Texas, and that's where I want to live. And it's no big deal. For them, one, you don't leave the collective. Where you live, where your family, you don't get up and leave them because there's no safety and security beyond that. You certainly don't leave your hometown and relocate. Wherever they settled, because they're a collective in nature, and because they were in a desert, they didn't do a lot of traveling. There wasn't a lot of vacations going, oh, I'm gonna go to Tel Aviv and I'm gonna go to here and there. They didn't do all of that. It was dangerous to be on the roads. It was a desert, so they kept in their collectives and they kept in their safety of their family units or their collective and their townsmen. So for for the angel to say, get up and move, was huge. We don't get that necessarily when God tells Abraham, get up from out of your kinfolk and go to a land where I'm going to show you. We're like, okay, get up and move. I'm gonna just get in the car, pack my stuff up, and we're gonna roll. No, that was ridiculously dangerous and unheard of. They didn't travel. So this is huge. And then he says, get and go. When Herod dies, an angel goes to Joseph and tells him, it's safe for you to go back. But because of who the king was, instead of settling in his native country with his common folks, he decided to settle in Nazareth. And all of these things were, as you see it consistently being said, this was done so this prophecy could be fulfilled. This was done so that prophecy could be fulfilled through the actions of Joseph. Within the evolution of the Christian Christmas narrative, the role of Joseph goes unnoticed or taken for granted. We've already dealt with this. Sharing in Mary's shame. It's well documented that the betrothed Judean woman who winds up pregnant out of wedlock was a scandal of epic proportions in that day. It's nothing short of a miracle facilitated by God that she was not executed. That miracle also came by way of her betrothed man named Joseph. This carpenter from Galilee, he was a carpenter, just a tradesman, found himself unwittingly tossed in a most undesirable circumstances for an engagement. Even today, your fiance pops up pregnant and ain't your baby, you got a problem. That's a problem by today's standards. That is a crisis, and you feel bad for the individual, and poor him, and what did she do? But he's in the middle of a situation, and he didn't ask to be in it. He was just a tradesman, and I thought I was going to get married, and we was going to start a life, and that was it. Joseph's solution was to terminate the engagement privately, the equivalent of divorce, rather than publicly have her killed. But he had a vision. And in this vision, he's told that the child that was not conceived through indiscretions by Mary, but by the Holy Spirit. It's worth noting that in that vision, the instructions are not Mary. God said, Mary. That is a terrible. God said, take Mary as your wife. That's not what the instructions were. The instructions were, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, indicating the idea that there was some options on Joseph's behalf, because he had the right to leave her. Now, later on, it says that he did as the angel commanded. In other words, he was not afraid to take Mary as his wife. But the angel does not tell him to take Joseph as his wife. He simply tells him not to be afraid to do so. Joseph, with his dream, telling him it's okay, listens to it. That's something else we don't do a lot of, but they actually did listen to dream back then and thought they had spiritual significance. But Joseph decides, even though I could put this woman away, I just had this dream, and something in this dream told me that what's going on is a work of God. This decision solves one problem, but does nothing to change the fact that he's still running around with a pregnant wife. The questions, innuendos, gossip, and embarrassment of that situation are still going to be there and have potentially significant consequences for the life of Joseph in a society in which honor and shame are critical and affect. And we've talked about how important that was in their society. Over here, you get a bad reputation, you can still get a job, you can still get credit, you can still get, it's just people don't like you. Over there, you become shamed, your honor diminishes. Nobody's going to do business with you. Nobody's going to do, it affects the way that you live your life. In Luke 2, the second chapter, 4th and 5th verses, their narrative reads that when they got to Bethlehem at the time of Jesus's birth, she was still pregnant. So this means that when he returned to his hometown to pay these taxes, he still had his pregnant fiancée to haul around on his camel, and it's likely that people who knew him were looking around asking questions. So think about Joseph. We talk about Mary and what she went through. Joseph, this man, decided to still take for his wife this pregnant woman, and is carrying her around on his camel, going back to his hometown. What's wrong with Joseph? Why don't he leave her? All the talk that you would think of that we would normally do, they talked back then just as much, maybe even more so. It was he decided to go ahead and marry her in spite of the shame that she carried. He carried that with her. And it would be a mistake to assume that he did it because he loved her. That's an Americanized explanation. But realistically, in that day, it wasn't uncommon for you to get married to somebody you barely met. The marriages were arranged. So you can Americanize it and say, well, he loved Mary, but we don't have that in the text. The only thing that we have in the text is that Joseph had a vision. God told him, the angel told him, it's okay to marry her. And he decided to go ahead and marry her because God was up to something. Found out God was up to something and decided to bear the shame of Mary's situation and include himself in the plan that God was actually executing. So Joseph, why is Joseph critical, and why is he important in the plan of the Messiah? The reason that he's important is because it was prophesied that the Messiah would be the legitimate heir to the throne of David, part of the messianic identity. This person is going to be a descendant of David. Well, Jesus was a descendant of God. He didn't have a birth father. We don't have documented Mary's lineage. But Joseph was a son of David. Okay? And by marrying Mary, Jesus, as his son, was conferred all of the rights and all of the inheritance that Joseph would have been due by way of adoption or by way of being a stepson. So we've got Jesus, Son of God. He's coming. He's supposed to be the Messiah, but he does not have a legitimate claim to the throne of David to actually be considered the Messiah. When Joseph decides he's going to marry Mary, when he goes through that action, all of a sudden now Jesus has the legal and genealogical right to be called the Messiah. Who Jesus was intended to be was fulfilled because Joseph decided he was going to go ahead and marry her anyway. Effectively, God chose Joseph to complete the messianic identity of his son. That's huge. Nobody talks about this. Joseph is just some witless idiot who ended up being stuck in a little situation. No, Joseph was a big deal in the plan of God, and his willingness to do and endure the shame and stigma of the situation was huge. He also had the responsibility for providing and protecting the Son of God, which required that he take the monumental task of relocating to Egypt, which we said is a huge deal. It was an inconvenience and imposition of the highest magnitude, yet for the sake of the work that God was doing, Joseph was obedient to heavenly instructions to leave and finally return. So we've got what Joseph took on by getting married to this woman, by accepting her, was humongous. The responsibilities, the inconveniences, his entire life was reshaped because he went ahead and took this woman that he had every right to put away. So, said all of that to say this. The story of Joseph and Mary, but we're talking about Joseph today. The story of Joseph is a powerful example of God's partnership with man in shaping the course of humanity. God relies on the obedience of his people to execute his agenda and demonstrate his love and glory upon the earth. Think about what we're talking about here. God's plan of salvation was contingent upon people with the humility to accept his agenda and submit to their roles in his plan. In other words, he comes to Mary, angel comes to Mary, says, Mary, you're going to be pregnant. Mary says, okay, let it be so. All right. Glenn, can you help her? Yeah, I understand. Glenn, can you take care of that for her? Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's no problem. We got to make sure that that's taken care of.
Let me tell you, because we're speaking.
Okay, so I'm gonna keep moving along while she takes care of that. God comes to Mary, or angel comes to Mary, says, Mary, you're gonna be pregnant. Mary says, okay. God comes to Joseph. Joseph tells Joseph, don't be afraid to take Mary for your wife, because God's doing something. Joseph goes ahead and takes Mary for his wife. The entire plan is contingent upon people that are actually willing to take on a humongous amount of embarrassment. He's about to reorder the world, but it boils down to people that are willing to accept some stuff that they don't really need to accept or put up with.
They could have just said no to.
Exactly. They could have said no, but they took it. They decided to embrace that. This came at great peril and cost. Joseph's preference, his initial instinct, was to walk away from Mary, but God had a plan. Joseph's life would have been simpler if he would have put her away, but God had a plan. Upon hearing that God had a plan, Joseph changed his plans, risked his reputation, reordered his future to accommodate that plan. The world changed for the better because Joseph had enough humility to submit himself to something that was bigger than he was. Many people want the world to change. Most people would settle for seeing the lives of their loved ones changed. Relatively few people possess the humility to allow themselves to be agents to facilitate that change. Typically, the expectation is that God is going to make changes by miraculous fiat. The story of Christmas clearly demonstrates that God works world-changing miracles through people. Everybody wants God to change stuff. Everybody wants things to change. Nobody wants to be different. Everybody wants things to be changed. Nobody wants to be inconvenienced with the task of being an instrument for the miracle of God. Now, there's plenty of Christians world over who would raise their hand. If I would have asked people before we started this, how many of you want God to use you to perform a miracle? I'm sure just about everybody's hands would have been up. If any church, you put up a sign-up sheet for God to work a miracle through them, you're probably going to have a line to try to get to that sheet. But when it comes time to invest time, energy, effort, and finances for the sake of people that they may not know or people that may not like them, typically everybody else got something to do. So God sets up a situation where the miracle of the Messiah, this is the grand design of 42 generations of people. The miracle of the Messiah is based on the humility of Joseph. If Joseph doesn't marry Mary, if Joseph doesn't take her as his wife, the messianic requirements are fulfilled. That's how much he invests in you and me, and how important partnership is and willingness to be able to accept what he's presenting to us. Joseph decided that what he had a right to do, Joseph decided his rights to put away this woman, and what he was entitled to was less important than whatever God was up to. The world was forever changed because both Joseph and Mary were humble enough to choose to bear the humility that was the scandal of Christ's birth. It's worth noting that out of apparent scandal came the greatest blessing that humanity has ever received since creation. The scandal of Christ's birth changed everything. In his infinite wisdom, the Almighty Creator can birth miracles and blessings from the ashes of scandals and tragedy. That's the part of what God did in Christmas. There is this scandal, there's this illegitimate woman. People are talking, people are wondering, people are looking, pointing fingers, who did what and who was wrong. And the world is transformed. We have access to God out of scandal, out of tragedy, out of difficult situations that we deal with. God has the wisdom to birth miraculous, life-changing experiences that change our lives, that change the lives of the people that we're in contact with. It's worth noting that the trajectory of life and circumstance in the life of a believer is not contingent upon the perspectives of friends, loved ones, enemies, or the world at large. Rather, it is solely dependent upon the sovereignty of God and our humility to submit to kingdom principles and kingdom agendas. It doesn't matter how ugly the situation is. It doesn't matter how confused and complicated and convoluted things are. What matters for a believer who is walking in the path of God is, what is God looking to do through this situation? What miracles, what things is God looking to do through my misfortune, through the scandal, through the headache, through the questions, through being, let's go back to Mary, being pregnant in a cakewalk. Right? Being pregnant in a cakewalk, the physical discomfort of it, not to mention all of the things that came with it socially that we've talked about. In the midst of all of that came forth a completely different world. To see, if we want to see worlds change, if we want to see the lives and circumstances of loved ones transform, God needs a people who are humble enough to be unappreciated. The people of God who have received and experienced the love and grace of God must come to a place where they decide that humanity is worth humbling oneself for, so that way humanity can be blessed. God's looking for people that are humble enough to get in the grit of life with those who don't want their messes touched, and relating with them until they allow God's love to wash it away without fear that getting some on them is going to make them less saved. He's looking for a people that are humble enough to have their reputations run down for the sake of reconciling souls. If the world is going to be changed, then at some point the disciples of Christ have to stand up and declare that the agenda of the kingdom is greater than individual agendas, egos, wants, needs, validation, vindication, or personal glory. They must imagine and strive to embody the kingdom in which the least will be the greatest and the greatest will be the least. Believers must find themselves willing to endure the indignity of being a vessel for scandalous, inconvenient miracles in partnership with God for worlds to be transformed. So we all want our loved ones saved. We all want our family and our friends to be touched and blessed of God. We all want God to work miracles. And we want God to do it. We don't necessarily need to be involved in it. God says that that's not how this whole thing is set up. That's not how, yes, I can bless them, but I put you in the mix. Just as I sent my son into a fallen humanity and look for him to bear the infirmities and indignities of his brothers and sisters, I've put you in uncomfortable and hostile territory sometimes because I'm looking to bless somebody through you. And the challenge is being humble enough to eat that. Being humble enough to accept what comes with that. When they don't appreciate it, when they talk about you, when they misunderstand you, when they act like you're a pain in their behind and would rather not be bothered with you. You respect the boundaries and everything that's set up. We talked about when Jesus washed Peter's feet. When Peter said no, Jesus stopped and said, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be able to clean you. We're not going to have a relationship. And Peter changed his mind. They have something to do with it. But our willingness to humble ourselves. I don't deserve to be treated like this. I ain't do nothing to them. I'm entitled to be, no, I deserve to be respected. I don't deserve to be disrespected this way. I don't deserve to be, it's not about us. Jesus' example says, I can change the world if I can get a few folks who are not worried about what they're entitled to. I can touch, I can break chains, I can transform dysfunctions, I can break cycles if I just got a few people that are willing to say, whatever it is that you're doing in this season and whatever I have to carry while you're doing it, don't do it without me. If it means that they're going to lie on me, if it means I'm going to get stabbed in the back sometimes, If I can change a life, if by the time we're said and done, somebody can see you more clearly, somebody can understand you a little bit better, somebody can be drawn a little bit closer. God's looking for somebody who says, I'll forego what I have a right to advance your agenda, to build up your kingdom. It's easy to talk about it when we say we're going to have a revival and we're going to save souls. It's a lot tougher to say we're going to get out and actually deal with some people that might not like us too much sometimes and might not care for us, and we're going to love them and we're going to treat them and show them the love of God, and we are going to humble ourselves enough that we're not worried about whether or not they reciprocate. That's a completely different degree of ministry. But that is the Christmas story. That is the humility of Christ as he worked through, made himself of no reputation, did not please himself, but instructs us to please others as it is their edification and benefit. This Christmas, let us thank God that somebody decided we were worth being embarrassed over. If it was nobody else than Christ, but I believe we've had people that have touched our lives throughout, who decided that we were worth being embarrassed over, talked about, and being inconvenienced. Everything doesn't fit in our schedules, and we got stuff we got to do. We come, we go, we rip, we run. We got a million different demands. But when it comes to relationship building and ministering to people, at some point in time, that has to become a priority. And my rest, my relaxation, my whatever ambitions and whatever I thought I wanted to do with my life ends up taking a back seat, because there's somebody that God has put in my life that I can minister to and try to show God's love to. Somebody did it for us. God himself looked at me, and y'all don't know what my saved life has 20-something years has been like. Y'all don't know the ups and downs and the shadows, and thank God that he doesn't, because some of y'all, but God looked at me and said, you're worth humbling. You're worth me coming down for. You're worth me putting up with stuff I ain't got to put. The least I can do is deal with you, and y'all like me, and then there's some people out there that don't, but when I come in contact with them, the least I can do is try to show that same humility and endure. I don't have to put up with it, but if I can show them something different. Sometimes people are just looking for something different, and they haven't encountered it, and they don't know what to do with you when they first encounter you, because they're not used to it. It scares them, it freaks them out, and they want to run and talk about you or push you away, or wait to see you trip and fall. But when you show your steadfastness, when you show that it's real, when you show that this is who I am because this is who God is and I've been transformed by his love, there's no powerful testimony. The Bible itself can't change people's lives the way your testimony can. We should glorify the Father and Creator that the Son did not believe himself above the funk of fallen creation to walk with and identify with for the sake of the kingdom. We should be grateful that Christ did not deem his own comfort the highest priority, but saw the redemption of people as a joy that was worth enduring scandal and death to achieve. This is Christmas. This is what this is about. Not just that somebody was born on a day, not just that the Son of God was born on a day, but everything that it means to us, how our world is transformed because of it. The love that he showed and the humility that he showed in that. Finally, as we should examine ourselves to see how in the year to come, we can partner with God to embody this kind of humility and demonstrate a divine love to people that are in desperate need of it. So as we go about on Friday, unwrapping our presents that we just wrapped on Thursday, that maybe we bought on Wednesday, maybe, as we go about that ritual and spending time with family and loved ones, and you know, one of the things that we talked about initially was the depression that accompanies some people's Christmases, because their circumstances aren't what they want them to be, because their financial circumstances aren't what they want them to be. If people saw this in Christmas, it would deliver them from a lot of that.
I believe that.
But that's not what the commercials show. That's not. Honestly, this isn't even the scope of what usually gets preached in a Christmas program. But this is the message of Christmas. This is where we want to focus this year as we move forward. The humility that Christ showed, how can I figure out as I go through my situations, as I deal with people that don't like me, and I haven't done anything to them, as I deal with people that don't know how to treat me fairly and don't know how to be fair to me. Do I lash out at them? Do I let it change the way that I deal with them? Or can I find it in myself to say, it doesn't matter that I don't deserve the treatment I'm getting. What matters is that this is the kingdom. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. We are people that can walk and talk and demonstrate the love and grace and power of God in their lives as we interact with them. I hope that these 3 lessons or these 3 discussions have blessed somebody and helped you to observe Christmas a little bit differently, not just as a day, but on Christmas Day, it's not just the day, it's the past and what God has done, and looking forward to what he's going to do in the year upcoming. God blessed us this year, and he's going to bless us next year, as long as we continue to walk with him, because he's that good. And so when Christmas hits, it's an exciting occasion, because we'll remember